They said I was too generous until I used the trust fund they forgot I created. That's what started it. Not a scandal, not a screaming match. Just a quiet afternoon at my kitchen table, reading an email from my nephew that began with, "Hey, Auntie, could you float us a little more this month?" Float. Like I was a bank with no walls. Like my kindness was expected, not earned. For years, I believed love meant giving without limits. I wrote the checks, signed the guarantees, swallowed my pride while they threw family around like currency. But the truth? They never saw me as family, just financing. The story isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming your place when the people closest to you treat your worth like a line item. It's about a woman who set up a trust fund in silence and nearly used it as a weapon, but chose instead something sharper: boundaries. If you've ever been guilted for giving too much, if you've ever been told you're cold just for finally saying no, then this story will speak to you. Hit subscribe so you don't miss how it ends, because not every act of power looks like slamming a door. Sometimes it's just closing a folder and walking away. The direct deposit hit just after sunrise, same as always. I was sitting at the kitchen table, still in my scrubs from the overnight shift. My back ached from 12 hours on my feet, but the house was quiet, and that silence, soft, expectant, made it easier to breathe for a moment. I opened the banking app. The number blinked at me. What I'd earned for holding pressure on bleeding wounds, for lifting stretchers with aching wrists, for calming down a grandmother whose lungs were collapsing. I let myself look at the full amount just once. Then I tapped transfer. 85%. Straight into the joint family account. Not out of obligation, not exactly. It was what we'd agreed on. "We'll handle it for you," my mother had said. "Just focus on work, sweetheart. We'll take care of the rest." It was easier to nod. I took a screenshot of the transaction, the timestamp still warm on the corner of the screen. Then I opened my encrypted folder, the one with the password only I knew, and saved it inside a folder titled simply, Deposits. The kitchen smelled faintly of reheated rice and detergent. I could still hear the drip from the bathroom faucet, slow and stubborn. I got up, stretched my shoulders, and reached for a glass. Outside, the neighbors' porch lights were starting to blink off one by one. Another morning in this row of near-identical townhouses, where everything looked decent enough if you didn't look too long. Sometimes I wondered if this quiet was what safety felt like. Other times, it felt like a cushion muffling a scream. I found it next to the glass of water I'd left out the night before, a folded receipt, creased once down the center. The paper had absorbed moisture from the glass's condensation, the edge curling slightly like a ribbon beginning to fray. It left a faint arc on the wooden table, like the ghost of a ring. I picked it up carefully and held it against the light. Gas station, $42, pump 6. It wasn't mine. I hadn't driven since the last shared trip to the clinic. The ink had started to blur at the edges. I placed it beside my phone, unsure whether to throw it out or file it away. It didn't seem important, not yet. But something about that edge, that damp, ghostly curve, made me hesitate. I pressed the paper between two coasters to keep it flat. Later I'd find it again, and it would mean more than I'd ever expected. But for now I went about rinsing the glass, wiping the table, straightening the chairs. Routine made everything feel more manageable. The folded receipt lay silently under its weight, a small crease in a life I hadn't yet started unfolding. "Just let us take care of it for you." That was what Mom always said. She didn't even look up from the kitchen counter when she said it last week. Her hands moved quickly, slicing scallions into thin green rings. I'd come home on a rare afternoon off, and she'd made sure I came straight there. "Eat something decent for once," she'd said. I nodded, not because I agreed, but because nodding was easier than explaining what I really wanted. A little breathing room. Just some space between what I earned and where it ended up. "We've got the house, the utilities, all those little things covered. You just need to work hard. That's enough." I didn't respond. I just sipped the tea she poured, jasmine, too sweet, and watched how the light struck the edge of the cabinet. There was no sharpness in her voice, and that made it harder. She wasn't trying to control me. She truly thought she was helping, keeping things taken care of, neat, efficient, managed. Which is why it felt like I wasn't allowed to say no. Obedience disguised as gratitude, dependence dressed up as love. I said, "Okay." Of course I did. Rent, gas, groceries. I kept the numbers on a sticky note tucked into the back of my phone case. A quiet ledger I could pull out when the world felt unstable. I wasn't reckless. I budgeted down to the dime. Still, each month, I ran just under the line. I'd stopped ordering takeout months ago. Stopped buying coffee, even the cheap kind. The hospital vending machine was my splurge. A granola bar sometimes, if I stayed past 16 hours. I had once dreamed of saving up for a rainy day fund. 3 months of expenses, minimum. Just a little cushion in case I fell. But the dream kept slipping further away, like mist from a kettle. Each time I moved a paycheck into the joint account, I told myself it was temporary, that someday I'd build my own foundation. I just had to get through this phase. Be patient. Be loyal. My phone buzzed with a new notification. I swiped it away. I added up the month's totals again, even though I knew them by heart. Just enough to scrape by, not enough to breathe. I whispered it to myself like a mantra sometimes. Just a few years, then it'll be different. I'd walk past the darkened living room after a shift, still in my worn sneakers, and say it softly as I reached for the hall light. Just a few more paychecks, then I'll have a cushion. I'd see a family on the sidewalk, stroller, dog, grocery bags, and think, one day I'll have my own. It wasn't that I resented them, my parents. They had done what they thought was best. But somewhere along the way, what had started as trust turned into routine. And routine, when unchallenged, becomes law. The kind of law no one remembers writing, but everyone's expected to obey. I thought that by keeping quiet, I was being filial. That silence was a kind of honor. Now I wasn't so sure. The folded receipt, still pressed between the coasters, felt heavier than it should have. Like it was holding a story I hadn't yet allowed myself to read. Before I left for the clinic, I peeled the receipt free. It had dried by now, its texture stiff and slightly warped. I ran my finger down the center fold, pressing it flat against the table's smooth grain. Then, with care, I aligned it to the edge, straight, centered, precise. Not for anyone else, just for me. I slipped it into a zippered pouch inside my backpack, behind my license and a paperclip with 2 unused bus tickets. There was no dramatic resolve, no sudden fury. Just a quiet understanding that something had shifted, that I needed to remember where my money went and why it mattered. Outside, the porch light clicked off with a soft tick. I walked out the door. The morning was still cool, the sidewalk littered with early leaves. I pulled my hoodie tight and didn't look back. Not yet. The deposit cleared again the following Friday, right on time. I didn't even have to look anymore. My fingers moved on muscle memory. Swipe open, tap transfer, back out. A few seconds, and 85% of my paycheck had disappeared into the family account. The habit had grown limbs. I wasn't just doing it. It was doing me. That morning, the laundry room down the hall was humming. The old communal washer made that low, rattling groan, the one that always reminded me of distant thunder. I poured cereal into a chipped bowl and stared at the flakes floating unevenly in the milk, soggy at the edges. It was quiet in the apartment, the kind of quiet that doesn't soothe, just reminds you how long it's been since you heard someone say your name. I opened the spreadsheet again, not the joint one, my own, a personal tab I kept hidden behind fake labels. The utilities file was actually where I tracked every personal expense, every box of instant noodles, every refill on ibuprofen, every bus fare when the carpool fell through. I didn't record indulgences. I couldn't afford them. The lopsided ceiling fan clicked in the background, like a metronome that had lost rhythm. I rubbed my eyes, blinked twice, and went back to calculating. There was enough for basic groceries if I didn't buy meat this week, enough for the Metro card, enough for a couple extra eggs, enough if I was careful. I moved the cursor to next month's column inside. The auto transfer was the first thing in bold. At noon, my phone buzzed with a message from Mom. Family expenses tight. Can you add a bit more this week? It wasn't a demand, not exactly. Just a sentence that curled like smoke around whatever I'd been telling myself about boundaries. I stopped typing mid-report and leaned back, letting the hum of the fan above the desk pass over my face. My coffee had gone cold. I took a sip anyway. Bitter. Finn. She always used we. We are tight. We need this. We're trying. I didn't know where the we started or ended anymore. I typed, okay, then deleted it. Typed again. Let me check. But I didn't send that either. Instead, I stood up, stretched my arms overhead, and looked around the apartment. The living room was more of a corner. The desk was a fold-out. The couch had a throw I found on clearance, and still, I liked it. I liked the smallness of it, the autonomy, the way no one else's footsteps echoed through it. The phone buzzed again, this time with a notification, not from her, but from the banking app. The transfer had already gone through, auto-scheduled, like always. I hadn't canceled it. Not yet. That night, dinner was cup noodles and the last of the instant coffee. I lined up the trash bag, tied it tight, and took it downstairs. The hallway light flickered once as I passed the mailboxes. Nothing but junk mail. And a coupon for carpet cleaning addressed to resident. I tossed it out and stepped into the breeze outside. The stars were faint tonight. Street lamps blurred into pale halos. Someone 2 doors down was playing a late-night radio show. Jazz, soft and warbling. I stood there for a moment, listening, the warm plastic of the bag handles cutting slightly into my fingers. When I returned to the apartment, I turned off the overhead light and sat on the edge of the bed. I stared at the list I'd scribbled that morning. Gas, rice, toothpaste. Next month's rent? I circled toothpaste and added a question mark. There was just enough for that. The comfort in surviving off simple things had its limits. After a while, bare minimum started to sound like, don't ask. Still, I reminded myself, this wasn't forever. It couldn't be. Late that night, I checked my email and saw an update from Mom. A color-coded spreadsheet labeled Household Contributions. Each row had a family member's name. Mine was highlighted in yellow. Next to it, the dollar amount. Month by month, increasing slightly with each cell. It was meticulous, impressive even, in a way that made my jaw tighten. There was a tab for comments. I clicked it. Under mine, reliable support. She always comes through. I stared at that sentence longer than I should have. It was meant to be praise, a compliment wrapped in duty. But something about it made my stomach fold in on itself. I'd always come through, hadn't I? Even when I was exhausted. Even when I was unsure. Even when I didn't know if I was giving from loyalty or fear. I closed the laptop and stared at the faint reflection of myself in the black screen. A reliable support. Not a person, not a voice, just a function. That sentence looped in my head for hours. I washed the dishes with that sentence in my ear. I showered with it under the spray. I dried my hair with it echoing like a sermon. Reliable support. She always comes through. It made me think of a beam under a porch, the kind no one notices until it's cracked, the kind that's painted over, bolted down, leaned on until it splinters. I curled into bed, blanket tucked tight, and tried to push it aside. Maybe it was true. Maybe I was the reliable one. Maybe that was my strength. But that night, I dreamed I was holding up a roof alone. The rain came in through the sides, and every time I shouted, no one heard. Just wind and creaking boards and a floor that grew colder. I woke to the sound of the wall clock ticking. The small apartment was still. The street outside hadn't yet come alive with morning, no kids on scooters, no delivery trucks. I reached over and locked my laptop screen with one quiet click, a final gesture. Then I looked up at the clock. The second hand passed 12 again, and again. Each tick like a match struck against silence. It started with a new permission notification. I was at work mid-shift charting vitals when my phone buzzed with the update. You've been granted view access to the joint account. View access, not control. Still, it was a shift, a breadcrumb of transparency. I tapped open the app in the supply closet, surrounded by gauze rolls and empty IV hooks. The numbers came up slowly, like they knew I was watching. Transfers, withdrawals, check payments. Some labeled clearly, utility bills, groceries, tuition. Others were vague. Home, misc, gift. No way to approve or deny, just to see. I stood there, thumb hovering over each line item, the glow of the screen casting long shadows against the wire shelving. A nurse knocked gently on the door. "Room 4's ready," she said. "Coming," I answered. Then I took a screenshot. It was a small rebellion, harmless, maybe, but something in me was beginning to wake, not angry, just alert. I emailed the image to myself, subject line, Ref 1103H. Then I closed the door behind me and went back to work. A week later, I opened the mailbox outside my apartment to find 2 envelopes, both with my name, both labeled Final Notice. I hadn't ordered anything. I hadn't signed for anything, and yet, there they were. The return address was a utility company, not one I used personally. I opened one with a letter opener I kept by the door. The paper smelled like toner and urgency. The numbers were bold, past due. The service address wasn't mine, but the name was. I held the letter at arm's length for a second, then closer again. A bead of sweat slid down my back, slow and steady. The second envelope was similar. Same format, same warning. My credit history, my name, my future being quietly stretched for reasons I hadn't agreed to. I pressed both flat on the counter, took photos. Backlit by the kitchen window, the pages looked thinner than they were, but they carried weight. I slid them into a new folder I'd just labeled House. It wasn't a plan, not yet, but it was a start. Dad was pouring tea when I brought it up, casually, over the kitchen table. "Some of the bills came in my name," I said. "Not a problem, just wondering how that happened." He didn't blink. "Chuyện nhà thì để nhà lo," he replied, smooth as ever. "We just used the most convenient name. You're the most stable one right now." That word, stable, struck something. He meant it as praise, I think, but it felt like someone had chosen me for my silence, not my strength. I nodded, keeping my face neutral. The steam from the teacup rose between us like a curtain. He kept speaking, soft and even. "It's temporary, just while we get things in order." I didn't ask what things. I didn't push. Instead, I folded the edge of the napkin in front of me, twice over. The room smelled of fish sauce and jasmine tea. A neighbor's dog barked outside, sharp against the quiet. I sat with him a while longer, neither of us touching the tea. Sometimes the hardest part isn't the lie. It's the effort to keep everything polite. That night I created a new document, a ledger. Columns, date, time, amount, label, remarks. I didn't use my main laptop. I used the older one I kept stored in a drawer, with no family logins, no syncing, no shared history. A clean slate. Each time I entered a transaction, I added a yellow post-it to the side of the screen. Verify. No receipt. Ask later. It wasn't paranoia, it was procedure. My breath steadied as the lines multiplied. There was something calming about naming things, about letting the data speak instead of emotion. I wasn't planning a confrontation. I wasn't even angry. Just awake now. The apartment lights buzzed slightly. I turned on a desk lamp instead. Warm, focused. I looked at the growing list. Then I saved the file. Firmware, Ledger, V1. Subfolder, House. That weekend I took a walk after the rain. The sidewalks still glistened, reflecting the taillights of passing cars in red and amber smears. Damp leaves stuck to my sneakers, and the air smelled like wet concrete and pine needles. I paused at the curb to tie my laces, and noticed a discarded envelope in the gutter. Crumpled, soggy, the ink mostly run. But the shape caught my eye. Not junk. It was addressed. To me. A leftover maybe, dropped in transit. I snapped a photo before tossing it in the nearest recycling bin. Later that night I uploaded the image into the folder. I labeled it, Envelope, Gutter, Confines. No one would believe it was intentional. Not yet. But I was starting to see a pattern. Missed bills. Duplicate charges. Quiet extractions. You don't notice the floorboards shifting until you start marking where the cracks appear. Back at the apartment, I created a backup drive. I copied everything, screenshots, scanned notices, images of the ledger, into one encrypted zip file. I named the archive simply, House. And then, without thinking too hard, I clicked the lock icon. The folder disappeared from sight, hidden but accessible. Mine. The room was dim. The microwave clock blinked 12:47 a.m. I leaned back in the chair, letting the coolness of the plastic seat press against my spine. My breathing slowed. The facts were small, discreet, unremarkable on their own. But together, they formed something I hadn't had in a long time. A record. A voice. A version of events that didn't have to beg to be believed. The statement arrived late Friday night. Not as a printed document, but through a banking app alert. I was brushing my teeth, half listening to an old true crime podcast, when the buzz came through. $1,200 withdrawal, memo, home. No receipt, no description, no matching line in the household spreadsheet. Just that word again, home. I wiped my hands, pulled on an old sweatshirt, and sat down at the kitchen counter with the bank app open. The screen cast a blue haze across the room, sharp and cold. I scrolled back to the previous month. There it was again. Home. Home. Message. Message. Some marked with numbers, others just blanks. No receipts uploaded, no verification, no digital paper trail. I tapped the latest transaction. Nothing expanded, no attached file. Just the time and date. I stared at the number, $1,200, and tried to guess what it could possibly be. Groceries? No. Tuition? Already paid. A repair? No emails, no text messages, nothing to explain the dip. I could feel my stomach pull in, a reflex older than logic. I took a screenshot, then another from a different angle. The second one caught the edge of the countertop, where the light from the screen met the shadow of my elbow. I don't know why I saved it that way. Maybe I wanted to remember how quiet it felt to not know where your money had gone. I saved both images under home_unknown_1200 and sat still. Saturday morning, I brought it up with Dad. He was adjusting the blinds in the front room, letting the late sunlight streak across the floor in pale diagonal lines. The windows hadn't been cleaned in months. There was dust in the corners, but the light still made its way through. I leaned against the wall, casual as I could manage. "There was a large withdrawal this week," I said, labeled home. "Just wondering what it was for." He didn't turn around. "It's all for the house," he said, measured. "You know how it is, things come up." I nodded, but I didn't move. "It's just, no receipt was uploaded," I added gently. That made him pause, a breath's length, nothing more. "I'll check with your mother, but don't worry," he said. "It's nothing bad, just house things." He smiled at me then, like I'd asked about the weather, and I smiled back, like I believed it. The coffee that morning tasted off, too strong, maybe old. I set the mug down and stepped outside onto the porch, where the sun was low but bright. From the doorway, I could see the neighborhood waking up. Sprinklers hissing over yellow grass, a child riding a scooter in lazy loops, someone wheeling out a garbage can in pajama pants. The air smelled like last night's rain burning off the pavement. I leaned on the porch rail and let the silence settle. Inside, I could hear my parents talking, muffled, indistinct. The tone wasn't angry, just hushed, like a conversation being edited in real time. I didn't move. I didn't lean closer. The screen door behind me squeaked slightly in the wind, then stilled. The porch light, which always clicked off around 8, was still on. Its warm yellow beam stretched long across the floorboards, touching the doormat, the edge of my shoe, and reaching, barely, the tip of the carpet just inside the house, where the damp from last night's storm had darkened the fibers. I watched the light hang there for a moment, as if unsure where to fall next. That afternoon I sat at the desk with the ledger open. The cursor blinked, waiting. I started typing. Requesting documentation for $1,200 withdrawal dated. Then I stopped. My finger hovered over the keyboard. I erased the sentence, then typed a new one. Would appreciate a receipt for recent household expense. I stared at it. Too formal, too cold. I deleted that too. Eventually I wrote nothing. Instead, I opened a new tab and scrolled through old financial blog posts about boundaries, about transparency, about what was normal in multi-generational households. None of them made me feel any better. I turned off the screen and closed the laptop. The click echoed more loudly than I expected. I sat in the quiet and felt the quiet sit back. I found my old debit card in a drawer that hadn't been opened in months. It was still sharp at the edges, unused. The bank logo hadn't even faded. I held it between two fingers and rubbed the surface, feeling the grooves of the numbers beneath my thumb. I put it back in my wallet, next to my ID and my clinic badge. It didn't mean anything yet, but it was a piece of something I'd almost forgotten belonged to me. I sat back and exhaled. The card made no sound, but I felt it anyway. The presence of a choice. The porch light had stayed on all day. By evening, its glow wasn't warm anymore. It was faint, diluted by the setting sun. Through the front window, I saw the beam stretch again, across the living room, over the entryway rug, and toward the corner where my shoes sat, still damp from that morning's walk. I knelt down and ran my hand across the edge of the rug. Still wet. The light reached it and stopped, just shy of the stain. I wasn't looking for it. I'd opened the ledger that morning, intending only to log the latest recurring debit, the one labeled Utilities West Side, same as every month, nothing unusual, but it was there, sitting in plain sight. $8,000. Category: Gift. Memo: to M. My breath hitched, subtle but immediate. I didn't even realize I'd stopped breathing until I blinked. I clicked for the details. The transaction had cleared 2 days ago. It was pulled directly from the joint account. No receipt, no backup, no documentation. I stared at the screen, letting the number absorb into me. 8,000. The label was clear. It wasn't rent, not a loan, not reimbursement, just a gift. To M. M was my brother. I pushed the laptop back an inch, as if distance would dull the sharpness. The fridge hummed. Outside, a garbage truck rumbled past. I sat perfectly still, palms flat against the table. I didn't know which stung more, the amount or the casualness of the word gift. The street outside my window echoed 3 sharp siren bursts. Not emergency, just city noise. Then silence returned, like nothing had happened. I picked up my phone and texted, "What's the $8,000 gift to M?" 3 dots blinked for a while, then vanished. 10 minutes later, a reply. "Just a little something for your brother. He needed help setting up." No further explanation, no apology, no question about how I felt. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed itself. Then I powered it off entirely. The apartment was quiet again. Too quiet. I opened the ledger again, found the entry, highlighted it, then changed the cell color to red. It wasn't angry. It was just the clearest way to see it. The moment something broke. There were other flagged lines in the spreadsheet now. Yellow for pending clarification, gray for no receipt found. But this one was red, a rupture. I pressed the arrow key down, scanned the next line. Utilities, gas, groceries, and then back to gift. I added a note in the margin, unauthorized. Then I saved and backed up the file. This wasn't about anger, not yet. But it was the first time I thought, I'm not imagining this. That evening, I tried to talk myself down. It's your family. They're not stealing from you, it's just generosity with bad communication. But the logic wobbled. I remembered the months I skipped coffee to cover rising grocery costs, the second job I picked up last summer, the night I said no to a new coat because the heating bill had jumped. And now, 8,000. Gone, without so much as a heads up. I sat on the edge of the bathtub and stared at the tile grout, uneven and a little mildewed. This wasn't just about the money. It was about the expectation that I'd never ask, that I'd always be okay with silence. I caught my reflection in the mirror that night. Tired eyes, hair pulled into a bun that had given up halfway through the day. The collar of my hoodie stretched, soft from years of wear. I looked like someone responsible, someone who always came through. And maybe that's why they did it. Not because they didn't care, but because they assumed I could handle it, that I wouldn't ask, that I wouldn't say no. I wiped a hand across the counter and stood up straighter. Maybe it was time they stopped assuming. I walked into the kitchen, turned off the light, let the dark settle around me. No statement, no drama. Just a small act of punctuation. Let the night say what I couldn't. I began recording the time. Not just the date, not just the amounts, but the exact minute a transaction cleared. I set alarms on my phone daily, 6:05 a.m. and 9:42 p.m., the two windows when most transfers seem to land. I didn't announce this to anyone. I didn't even write it down. I simply adjusted my schedule around the pattern. Each morning I'd open the app as I sipped lukewarm instant coffee, notebook open, pen in hand. There was something deeply grounding in the act of tracking, of turning chaos into a grid. Monday, 6:06 a.m., $35, household needs. 9:43 p.m., $120, miscellaneous. Tuesday, 6:05 a.m., $2,300, tuition. 9:42 p.m., $640, repairs. By Thursday, I had 9 new entries and only 3 matched with known receipts. I started color-coding the margins. Yellow for unverified, pink for discrepancies, blue for requests pending, red for confirmed misuse. It wasn't obsessive, it was surgical. I wasn't looking to accuse, I was looking to understand. My mother called around noon that Friday. Her voice was smooth, unhurried. "We need to have a quick chat sometime this weekend, sweetheart, nothing big." I was at the kitchen table, the laptop open, the scanner beside it glowing a faint blue. A fresh utility reminder sat beside me, newly scanned. "Sure," I said. "Let me know what time." She paused for half a beat. "Everything okay on your end?" "Things are fine," I replied. I didn't elaborate. She didn't ask further. After the call ended, I pressed scan and watched the machine feed the page slowly through. The motor whirred, mechanical and steady, the page catching slightly on the corner before smoothing out. The scent of fresh ink and static rose from the tray, oddly clean, like sun-warmed paper. The file saved to the desktop. Notice 1122_scan.pdf. I dragged it into the folder. Then I added a line to the ledger. November 22nd, 12:11 p.m. Notice received. Unlogged charge. The system was growing. Not elegant, not perfect, but increasingly undeniable. That evening, I opened a roll of painter's tape and began lining up the days on the wall. Above my desk, between 2 floating shelves, I stuck up a long strip of butcher paper, a makeshift timeline. Each column represented a day, each row a time slot. I copied notes from my journal onto color-coded sticky notes and pressed them into place. Yellow, requests. Red, withdrawals. Blue, verifications. Gray, promises not kept. The layout was crude but effective. It wasn't just about numbers anymore. It was about rhythm, cadence, a pattern of behavior that kept looping, confident in its invisibility. I stepped back and took a photo with my phone. The flash reflected off a corner and blurred the center. Still, I kept it. Labeled the image. Timeline v1.jpg. I wasn't building a case, I was building clarity. There was a moment, around midnight, when I paused and simply stood there in the dark. The only light coming from the narrow hallway. I'd been up too long. The adhesive smell of tape clung to my fingers. My wrists ached from typing, from sorting, from documenting. But I didn't feel drained, I felt seen. Not by anyone else, just by the record. The quiet, unwavering way that data doesn't lie, doesn't forget, doesn't guilt trip, doesn't ask for understanding, it simply says, "This happened, on this day, at this time." And I, for once, wasn't doubting myself. I closed the ledger, set the cap back on the pen, stepped into the hallway and stretched. Outside the window, a car passed slowly, headlights low and golden, flickering briefly against the wall before disappearing again. The night held. The next morning, I wrote one sentence in the margin of the ledger. Facts don't flinch. It wasn't a declaration. It was a reminder. That my instincts weren't overreactions. That my boundaries weren't betrayal. That documentation wasn't an attack. It was just a way to make sense of a system that had asked me to give and keep giving, without ever saying how much was enough. I printed 2 pages from the ledger, hole-punched them, and slid them into a slim black binder I'd found in the back of my closet. I liked the way the pages sat flat, firm, symmetrical. I liked the way the holes aligned perfectly with the rings. I liked the way it didn't ask me to explain anything. I placed the pen across the closed binder, horizontally, lined up with the edge. Then I leaned back in the chair and exhaled. No rage, no panic, no dramatic vow. Just a pencil-thin calm. Something was forming. Not revenge, not rebellion, but a record. And records, I'd learned, had their own kind of quiet power. I asked for the receipt, texted it calmly on a Tuesday morning after my shift, the kind of shift where the air smells like saline and floor wax and the lights never dim. I sat in the break room, surrounded by laminated charts and paper cup stains, phone in one hand, granola bar in the other. "Hi, can you send over the receipt for the $1,200 marked home?" No exclamation point, no edge. An hour later, Dad replied, "Sure, I'll send it over tomorrow." Tomorrow. The word felt light, harmless, like a cloud with a hard center. That night I checked again. No receipt. The day after, nothing. I added a note in the ledger. Requested documentation, response, tomorrow. No follow-up received. By the end of the week, I'd heard the word tomorrow 4 times, across 3 topics, all related to money. It had become a delay tactic wrapped in politeness. I updated the wall chart. Another yellow sticky note, added under the pending column. The timeline was beginning to look like a traffic jam of deferrals. Saturday came. The kitchen was warm from sunlight, soft-edged through the curtains. I poured tea into a mug that still had my childhood dentist's logo on it, and sat at the dining table with my laptop. I opened the household spreadsheet. Still no receipt. I texted again, this time shorter. "Hi, just checking on that document." No reply. The tea cooled beside me. The faint scent of ginger rose, then faded. I pulled out the drawer where we kept receipts from grocery runs and school payments. There were scraps from 2 years ago, but nothing matching the amount or date. I tucked the drawer shut and stood up, listening. The house was quiet except for the fridge ticking, that soft mechanical sigh it makes every few minutes. The silence felt deliberate. Later that evening, I heard the kitchen light flicker twice before staying on. I stepped out of my room and watched from the hallway. Mom was wiping the counter, slowly, as if the cloth needed convincing. She didn't look up when she spoke. "We'll find the paperwork soon, don't worry." "I'm not worried," I said quietly. She turned then, smiled too quickly. "It's just a matter of digging it up. These things get lost in piles, you know?" I nodded, but I didn't go back to my room. I sat down at the table, opened my laptop, and clicked the folder labeled Pending Documents. I added a new note. Verbal promise made 3/4. No written follow-up. She glanced over, saw the screen, said nothing. Some truths don't need argument. They just need time-stamping. I tried to remind myself. Asking for a receipt wasn't rebellion. It wasn't an accusation. It was standard procedure in any office, any rental agreement, any purchase. But in this house, asking meant implying someone had done something wrong, and no one wanted to feel wrong. So silence became our shared contract. Later that night, I opened a new note in the ledger. This time, I wrote not just the facts, but my own reactions. Asked calmly, felt tension rise. Still no anger, just pause. It wasn't much, but it was the first time I documented how I felt, not just what happened. The act felt both small and enormous. I leaned back, let the words sit. They didn't burn. They didn't sting. They just existed. And that, too, was enough. Sunday morning, I shut my laptop and sat on the couch with my knees pulled up, listening to the neighbor's leaf blower start up, that faint whining engine that made conversation impossible. I let it drown everything out. Then I whispered to myself, almost like a rehearsal. It's okay to ask. Again. It's okay to ask. Not demand, not accuse, just ask. And still be met with evasion, still be met with silence. That didn't make the question wrong. It just made the answer inconvenient. I closed the balcony door, sat down, and said aloud, "Next time, I'll wait for the receipt before I believe the reason." No one heard me, but I heard me. And that for once was enough. It didn't stop. The vague entries kept stacking. 2 more withdrawals labeled miscellaneous came through in the span of 10 days. One for $620, another for $450. No explanation, no notes, no replies to the receipts I'd asked for. They weren't catastrophic amounts, not alone, but they added to a pile, a pattern, and the pattern had weight. I sat at the desk early one morning, squinting at the screen as I logged the new entries. My eyes ached from poor sleep. My coffee tasted burnt. I copied the lines into the ledger, then paused. I'd been careful. I'd been polite. I'd asked. Nothing changed. So I opened my banking app and tapped over to my payroll settings. Under deposit routing, I added a new account. Mine. Private. Separate. Not all of it. Not yet. Just a portion. I set it to direct 30% of each paycheck into the new account starting next cycle. The rest I left unchanged, still flowing into the joint pool. It was a small act, quiet, but it felt like breath returning to my lungs. Later that day, I stood in the kitchen stirring a pot of oatmeal while the bank notification pinged my phone. I didn't reach for it. Instead, I listened to the slow simmer of the pot, the tiny hisses of air pockets popping as the oats thickened, the subtle sound of morning. Familiar, steady. When I finally picked up the phone, it was a confirmation. Routing update confirmed, effective next payroll. I locked the screen and placed it face down on the counter. Outside the window, wind moved through the branches. Someone's dog barked, then quieted. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. I wanted the silence to hold. Later that evening, Dad mentioned the joint account in passing. "We'll need to cover some things for Em again," he said, voice casual, folding laundry at the table. "Nothing big, just while he waits for the new job to start." I didn't ask questions. Didn't nod. Just sipped my tea and let the sentence land. "You've always been good about helping," he added softer. I let that sit, too. The dryer in the hallway clicked off, a faint buzzing, then quiet. I looked up and met his eyes. "Can you send me the receipt for the last few M-related charges, just so I can log everything cleanly?" He blinked, then smiled. "Of course." But no files arrived. Only silence, once more. That night, I sat with the ledger again, reviewing. I adjusted the formatting, made the columns tighter, the font clearer. Added a new tab titled Separate Account Activity. It had only one entry so far, an inbound deposit scheduled for Friday. I didn't feel defiant. I felt awake. I created a new folder in the archive, Self-Fund. Then I copied the backup drive again, this time with double encryption. Everything was in order. Everything had a name. I scheduled an appointment with a financial advisor, quietly, online. A woman I found through a friend who described her as gentle but firm, like a good surgeon. We confirmed the date. She sent over intake paperwork. Under the question, What's your primary financial concern? I wrote, maintaining personal boundaries without igniting family conflict. That night, I printed the form, signed it, and slid it into a folder marked Planning. Then I placed it in the same cabinet where I kept my birth certificate, passport, and professional license. Not to hide, but to protect. The next morning, I sat on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders. The neighborhood was waking slowly. Across the street, someone raked leaves, each scrape rhythmic and dry. A sprinkler clicked on. A screen door slammed shut in the distance. And then, my phone vibrated once. A new notification. Direct deposit received. No fanfare, just a chime. Soft, clear, final. I looked down. A portion of my paycheck had landed exactly where I'd sent it, into a space I controlled. For the first time in years, some part of my work came directly to me. No filter, no funnel, no explanation needed, just mine. On a gray Sunday morning, I downloaded the entire transaction history. All of it. The joint account's full archive. 2 years' worth of deposits, withdrawals, transfers, memos. The file exported as a CSV, cold and impersonal, the way truth sometimes needs to be. I didn't open it immediately. I just stared at the file name on my desktop. transaction_exporter.1.csv. Then I right-clicked and renamed it. Scope fully. It felt like drawing a line around something too large to name but too urgent to ignore. I moved the file into a password-protected folder, then backed it up again on a flash drive I kept in the back of the utensil drawer. It was a Sunday ritual now, to archive, duplicate, preserve. Not because I planned to weaponize it, but because I knew I was the only one keeping track.
Because if this ever needed to be explained, really explained, I didn't want to rely on memory. I wanted facts. Dated, labeled, undeniable. Mom texted mid-morning. Hope you're resting today. Let me know if you have time to chat this week. I stared at the message, then replied, Sure, let's schedule something. She didn't follow up. That same afternoon, I got a second message, not from her, from a friend of hers, someone I hadn't seen in years. Hey, your mom mentioned you've been a little distant? Just checking in, hope everything's okay. I didn't respond. Instead, I placed the phone face down and leaned back in the chair. They weren't asking if I was okay. They were asking if I was still compliant. I opened my notebook and wrote one sentence in capital letters. No arguments, only action. Underneath it, I listed the steps I still needed to take. Financial consultation, ledger consolidation, hard boundary language, emergency contact update, legal inquiry, trust structures. My handwriting was slanted and careful, as if clarity itself was now an act of resistance. I flipped to a new page and began outlining questions I'd bring to the advisor. What are the protections for education trusts? Can family funds be restricted by purpose? What if a cosigner misuses assets? The questions made me feel steadier. Like I wasn't circling the same fear anymore. I was building a plan. I drafted a checklist for the upcoming meeting. Title: Financial Reclamation Week 1. Confirm receipt splitting. Track undocumented withdrawals. Ask about gift limitations and shared funds. Define my monthly cap. The word reclamation felt big, maybe too big, but it stayed. I taped the list to the edge of my desk, slightly crooked. Let it exist in plain sight. That night I labeled the files with new precision. Ledger_history, envelope_scans, gift_8,000, unverified_withdrawals, grid. It was tedious, but it was mine, and every click, every renamed file, was a step back towards something I hadn't felt in years. Agency. Mom texted again that evening. It's starting to feel like you're avoiding us. Is something wrong? I read the message 3 times, then I typed, No, I'm just working on some things. No lie, just not their version of truth.
The phone buzzed again. We miss when things were simpler. I didn't reply. I placed the device on silent, slid it into a drawer, and sat in the dark for a while. Not lonely, just alone. And there's a difference. The lock on my small filing cabinet clicked shut. Inside, everything organized. Backups, printed records, photos, receipts, timeline screenshots, meeting notes. I pressed my palm against the top of the cabinet. The coolness of the metal met my skin like a quiet affirmation. This wasn't a war. It was a withdrawal. A measured return to myself. I looked out the window. The street was dim, the porch lights across the row flicking on one by one, like dominoes tipping into dusk. Mine stayed off. For now. The financial advisor's office smelled like lemon wood polish and beeswax. Faint, clean, deliberate. I sat on the edge of a velvet chair, fingers laced, listening as she explained the options with a kind of clarity that felt like breathing glass. Across the table her tone remained neutral, never too warm, never too distant. Just clear. We can establish an irrevocable education trust, she said, pointing to a clause in the draft. It can't be cancelled or rerouted once it's set. Beneficiaries fixed. Usage terms locked. You're the grantor. You set the rules. I nodded. Who would you like to name? I said it without hesitation. My nephews. Both of them. She wrote it down. No one else? No one else. She looked up for a moment. Not surprised, not judging. Just seeing. Then, any particular conditions? Education-related only. Tuition, books, verified expenses. Trustee? I'll serve as trustee until they're of age. Then they can manage it themselves. She nodded again, continued typing. The hum of the printer stirred to life in the background, quiet but purposeful. The language of protection had never sounded so precise. After signing the initial documents, I walked 2 blocks to the bank. The sky had a hard edge to it. Late autumn wind with no softness left. I clutched the folder in both arms like something fragile. Inside, the branch was near empty. A woman in her 50s guided me to a desk in the back. I'm here to open a dedicated trust account, I said, voice even. She nodded, asked for ID, scanned the paperwork. How much would you like to start with? I told her the amount, a portion of what I had been depositing into the joint account every month. For now, I added, it's redirected here. I signed the authorization, the transaction processed. No one in my family knew yet, but the money, finally, had a name. Back at home, I opened the drawer where I'd once tucked the damp receipt under a coaster. It was still there, curled slightly at the edge, the ink faded but readable. I pressed it flat, then slid it into a laminate pouch, sealed it, smoothed the air bubbles with the edge of a ruler. Then, I clipped it into the trust folder. Not because it had legal meaning, but because it was a marker, a beginning. The document that meant nothing at the time now marked everything that followed. I labeled the folder, Education Trust, Active. I took the funds I had been setting aside, the careful portion from my last paycheck, and transferred them directly into the new trust. No more detours. No more silent reallocation. This money had purpose now, walls, direction, and in that, I felt something rare. Relief. I printed the transaction confirmation, slid it behind the laminated receipt. The folder felt heavier in my hands than it should have. Not in burden, in meaning. I placed it gently inside the safe I'd never used for anything but expired passports and an old broken phone. Then I closed the door and turned the lock. The click echoed like punctuation. For the first time in months, I didn't check the joint account that evening. Instead, I made tea. Real tea. Loose leaf steeped for 4 minutes. The kind I used to make before everything turned into instant versions of itself. I sat by the window, hands around the mug, and let the quiet settle in. Not a reaction, not a warning shot, just a new rhythm. The street outside glowed in thin bands of porch light. My inbox pinged once. Confirmation from the trust bank. Deposit complete. Account secured. I didn't save it right away. I just watched the screen go dim again. I picked up the pen and signed the last of the documents. Not with flourish, just firmness. Each stroke landed with quiet certainty. The pages rustled gently as I flipped them. I initialed where needed, wrote the date, pressed the final corner flat. Then I gathered everything into the folder, closed the clasp, and sat still. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt aligned. This wasn't a break from my family. It was a declaration of care. For the ones who couldn't yet speak for themselves. The boys would never know the details, and that was okay. What mattered was that now, finally, their future couldn't be siphoned through silence. The advisor and I went through the trust documents line by line. Trigger clauses, successor trustees, specificity of use, conditions for revocation, or rather the impossibility of it. She read slowly, carefully, with the cadence of someone who respected paper more than performance. This clause, she said, tapping the page, ensures that once you've deposited, no one can remove funds for anything outside of educational purposes, not even you, unless it's for the beneficiary's direct schooling costs. I nodded. And this? I asked, pointing to the contingency line. That protects the trust if someone tries to challenge its purpose. The language here shields it from being co-opted by family under the guise of shared expenses. We sat with that for a while. The sun through the window moved across the grain of the conference table, landing briefly on the signature line. When I picked up the pen, my hand didn't shake. Each initial was clean, tight, final. And in that act, something unspoken inside me stopped flinching. She looked at me once we finished. What about the other accounts? The joint one? I asked. Yes. Do you still want it open? For now, I said. But I want to monitor every transaction. She nodded, opened a new tab, and helped me enable instant alerts. Every withdrawal, every deposit, every auto payment. They'd all ping my phone within seconds. No delay, she said. No ambiguity. My phone buzzed in her office. A $37 recurring debit. I smiled faintly. That's toothpaste and paper towels, I said. They get it delivered. We both knew I wasn't joking. When I got home, I forwarded the trust confirmation email to myself again. Then I labeled it, Trust Confirmed, Final. The inbox glowed with a quiet order I hadn't felt in months. I started tagging everything. Red for family financials, green for trust, blue for reference only. Then I archived the old chains, the ones where I'd asked for receipts and gotten delays. I didn't delete them. I just placed them in a folder titled Fog. Because that's what those months had been. Soft confusion, smoothed over by affection and avoidance. Now I had structure. Structure didn't mean distance. It just meant safety. I opened the kitchen drawer and pulled out the joint account debit card. The edges were frayed slightly, the strip half faded. I flipped it over in my hand, thinking. Then I slid it into an envelope, wrote, To be used with approval only, in small print on the front, and placed it at the back of the drawer. Not as a punishment, as a boundary. One they might notice, one they might not. But either way, it was there. That night I sat on the balcony with the binder in my lap. I read through each clause again, not because I didn't understand it, but because I needed to feel the assurance land twice. I thought about how much of my life had been about caretaking, about holding the weight for others while calling it love. And maybe it was. But now, this clarity, this structure. This too was love. Love without depletion. Love with edges. Love that didn't have to be explained to be real. I placed the binder in the small home safe beneath the stairs. The door clicked closed with a soft metallic hush. I turned off the hallway light and stood for a moment, hand still on the wall. The house didn't feel combative. It felt neutral, balanced. Like a room after surgery where everything's been cleaned, reset, waiting to begin again. I walked back to the kitchen. The phone vibrated once on the counter, a new withdrawal. $29.77. Household, Misk. I smiled just slightly and marked it. Already flagged. Already watched. Noted. Not feared. The transfer cleared at 7:02 a.m. I was still in bed when the alert buzzed through my phone. I blinked against the early light, opened the app and saw it. Completed. The trust account had received the second installment. Quiet. Seamless. Irreversible. I stared at the confirmation screen a moment longer than necessary, then locked my phone and slid it under the pillow. The room was still dim. The blinds let in only a soft gray, filtered and calm. I lay there with one hand over my stomach, feeling it rise and fall. Something inside me, a knot I hadn't named, loosened. It wasn't celebration, just relief and clarity. That night I stood in the hallway with the lights off, letting the darkness hold. Behind me, the kitchen hummed with its usual rhythms. Fridge motor, distant water heater gurgle. Nothing out of place, nothing alarming. But I didn't move. I let the dark speak. It said, "You're not going back." I walked slowly to the desk and turned on the lamp. Golden light spilled across the paperwork. The trust binder. The envelope of loose notes I hadn't yet filed. I sat, opened my laptop, and began drafting the email. The message was simple. Subject: Household Contribution Guidelines, starting next month. Dear Mom and Dad, going forward, any contributions I make toward shared expenses will require clear documentation, labeled categories, receipts, photo or scan. Pre-approval if over a certain amount. I'm happy to continue helping, but I need structure in place for transparency. Thank you for understanding. Me. I reread it twice, then attached a PDF. A one-page clarity statement. Just a table with checkboxes. No legal tone, just calm, just clear. My finger hovered over the trackpad for one long breath. Then I clicked send. The email slid out of view. The screen glowed faintly, then dimmed after a few seconds. I sat back and let the silence return. There was no outburst, no drama, no sudden crashing of glass or doors or words. Just that glow, and the sound of the house still steady. I didn't sleep that night, not because of worry but because of awareness, a kind of watchfulness. Like how surgeons stay up after a procedure, replaying every move even when the patient's stable. I made tea at 2:30 a.m. and watched the steam rise in long ribbons. The phone stayed quiet. I didn't check it. Whatever they thought, whatever would come next, it had to begin with truth, and I had said mine. Morning came slow and silver. I opened the blinds halfway, let the light stretch across the floor but not all the way to the hallway. A new email pinged. From Mom. No subject line, just a few words. We saw your message. Let's talk later. No warmth, no anger, just delay. I marked it as unread and stepped away from the desk. The screen stayed bright a second longer. Then, like all things lately, it softened, faded.
But the boundary remained. They found out about the trust before I told them. Not from me. Probably not from the boys either. They were too young, and I hadn't said a word. But someone must have mentioned it, maybe in a casual conversation that turned serious. Maybe through a banking alert forwarded in error. I knew they knew the moment I walked in. The house was too still. The kind of quiet that only shows up when people are waiting to argue but haven't figured out how to start.
Dad sat at the edge of the couch, unread newspaper on his lap. Mom stood by the kitchen counter, towel in hand, not drying anything. I stepped inside and closed the door gently behind me. "Is there something you want to explain to us?" she asked. I looked at her, then him. "No," I said. "You went behind our backs," she said next, her voice sharper than I'd heard in a long time. "You moved money into some kind of secret fund?" "It's not secret," I replied. "It's structured, for the kids. For education. Only education." Dad stood now, arms crossed. "You think you can just cut us out of family finances?" "I'm not cutting anyone out," I said calmly. "I'm protecting the part that matters most." Mom laughed, not a loud one, but the kind meant to shame. "So we're thieves now?" I didn't say that. You didn't have to. I walked to the dining table and placed a copy of the trust's terms. Printed, bound, simple. "This is what I've done. It's irrevocable, it's legal, and it's final." Dad didn't move to look at it. Instead, he said, "You always were good at going around people, hiding behind documents and systems." I met his eyes. "No," I said. "I've spent years not hiding. I've paid. I've contributed. I've stayed silent. This is the first thing I've done openly." No one spoke. Outside, a wind chime knocked once, then settled. Mom stepped closer. "So you don't trust us?" I paused. "I trust you to be yourselves. I trust that money doesn't stay where it's not protected." Her jaw clenched. "We raised you. And I'm grateful." I placed a second copy of the trust on the counter, beside the unpaid electric bill addressed in my name. Dad looked at it. He didn't pick it up. They didn't yell. They didn't cry. But the disappointment was thick in the room, like steam you can't clear. "You've been part of this house," Mom said. "And now you're not acting like family." I nodded slowly. "Maybe," I said. "This is what acting like family really looks like. Making sure the next generation doesn't inherit chaos." She turned her back. He sat down again. The conversation was over. I picked up the folder they didn't touch and slid it back into my bag. The wooden floor creaked beneath me as I walked to the door. Behind me, the sound of the refrigerator kicking on filled the silence. I reached for the knob, paused, then left without saying goodbye. The door shut harder than I meant it to. Not slammed, but firm, like a page turning itself. I sent the document the next morning, a simple PDF outlining how shared expenses would now be handled, line by line. Purpose, amount, proof, deadline. No legal jargon, no threats. Just boundaries and plain text. The email subject was, "Updated Family Contribution Guidelines. Please review." I attached a sample form, 1 page. Rows for date, reason, receipt image, requested amount. I even filled out the first line myself, just to show I wasn't above it. February 28th. Shared groceries. $143.12. See attached. The phone was quiet for most of the day. Then around 5 p.m. Mom replied, "This feels excessive." That was all she said. No greeting, no sign-off. I reread the message twice, then placed the phone face down. Boundaries always feel like betrayal to people who benefited from the absence of them. Dad didn't text. Instead, I saw him later that week when I stopped by to drop off some supplies for the boys. Notebooks, socks, vitamin gummies. He opened the door halfway, stepped back so I could come in, but didn't say much. As I set the bag on the counter, he cleared his throat. "This form thing, It's kind of overkill, don't you think? I didn't turn. I think it's overdue, I said. He watched me quietly. We're not running a business here, he added. We kind of are, I replied softly. It's just never been balanced. He didn't argue, but he didn't agree either. The silence was a standoff in its own way. Back home, I added a line to the trust ledger. March 2. Form system introduced. Pushback noted. Terms remain. I slid the note into the binder with the same careful motion I used in surgery. Deliberate, precise, detached from outcome. I didn't need them to like it. I just needed to stop bleeding in small, familiar ways. The kitchen clock ticked above me, unbothered. Time moved. Structure held. That was enough. The ceiling fan in the living room made its soft whir as I reviewed the next phase. I rechecked the calendar I'd taped beside my desk. Deadlines for receipts, intervals for deposits, notes from my advisor. The checklist was intact. The rules were now written, and for the first time, the emotional labor of tracking wasn't invisible. I took a picture of the updated expense form and filed it in a new folder. Contributions, 2025, Q1. Then I backed it up to cloud storage just in case. Not because I expected a fight, but because I wasn't leaving myself defenseless again. That night, I didn't send reminders. No gentle texts, no follow-ups, no apologies. If they wanted to contribute, the system was there. If not, that too was a choice. And I wouldn't be carrying both the burden and the guilt anymore. I brewed chamomile tea and let it steep longer than usual. The taste was bitter, but I drank it anyway. Some things only soothe when they've steeped long enough. I returned to the binder, closed it with a flat hand, slid it back onto the shelf. Not with reverence, with steadiness. Outside, I heard the sound of a neighbor's car engine starting, the soft scrape of tires over gravel. Life kept moving, and so did I. I had made the terms clear. Whatever came next, misinterpretation, resistance, silence, would no longer be mistaken for my responsibility. By the second week of March, I'd compiled everything. Not thoughts, not arguments, files. A full packet labeled ledger plus screenshots, plus correspondence, plus final notices. 52 pages in total, including notes, dates, images of receipts, and side-by-side records of every discrepancy over the last 18 months. It wasn't dramatic, just complete. I printed a master copy and placed it in a black presentation folder, the kind with clear sleeves that don't bend. Then I made 2 more, one for them, one for my own archive. I slipped the folders into a canvas tote and placed it by the door, where my clinic shoes used to sit. The bag looked soft against the hard tile. There was nothing to say yet, but when they were ready, I would not be speaking. The paper would. Mom called that evening. Not to talk about the folders, she didn't know yet, but to circle again. "You still upset with us?" she asked, using a tone that curled around discomfort like a scarf. "Not upset," I said. "I'm just done guessing." Pause. "That form you sent, your father said it made him feel small." I didn't write it to shame anyone. It felt legal. It's a framework. Silence, then quieter. "We're your parents." I said nothing. She filled the gap. "You're making it harder to trust you." That landed. I exhaled, not from guilt, from recognition. "Then we're even," I said. The next day, I printed the last file, the transaction log from my personal bank. It wasn't necessary, but I wanted the date visible, the final line showing the trust deposit confirmed. As the paper rolled out of the printer, the edge curled slightly, still warm. The toner smell was sharp, chemical. I watched the sheet emerge, just as I had watched a receipt curl under condensation months ago. That one was wet. This one, dry and deliberate. The edge fluttered once before settling. I smoothed it, then clipped it into the binder behind the ledger. Evidence didn't need to raise its voice. It just needed to exist. I took the folders to the kitchen table and laid them out like tools. One labeled, "For Family." One labeled Trust, Archive. One labeled Self. Each contained the same thing, but their purposes were different. I didn't rehearse what I would say. This wasn't a courtroom. It wasn't even a conversation anymore. It was a delivery. Truth, unwrapped. I zipped the canvas tote shut and placed my keys on top. Then I turned off the kitchen light. That night I dreamed of paper. Not fire, not confrontation. Just pages. Fluttering down a hallway, each landing perfectly flat. No one chased them, no one tore them. They just lay there, full of meaning, waiting to be read. When I woke up, the morning was overcast. My inbox had one new message. Can we meet Sunday? Just to clear the air. I didn't respond right away. I packed the folders, put on a coat, and left the house. Not to escape, but to deliver the story I had been writing in silence. As I drove, I thought about all the years I had kept proof in my mouth instead of on the page. The years I had swallowed doubt and called it gratitude. The years I had asked for nothing and was told that meant everything. Now the proof sat beside me in the passenger seat. Bound, numbered, laminated. No anger, no plea. Just sequence. Just record. And when I turned onto their street, I felt nothing rise in my throat. No tremor, no heat. Only breath. Steady. Steady. We met at the house on a Sunday afternoon. The air smelled like sliced citrus and surface cleaner. A candle burned in the entryway, something herbal, too strong. I carried the folder in under my arm and didn't take off my coat. They were already at the dining table. 2 mugs of tea sat untouched. I placed the binder down between us. This is everything. Every dollar I've contributed, every transfer, every withdrawal tied to my name. They didn't open it. I stayed standing. I'm not asking for repayment in full, I said. But I'm proposing a schedule, small amounts, over time, with structure. Mom crossed her arms. You want us to pay you? No, I said. I want accountability. Dad leaned back slightly. We're family. This isn't a loan office. It's not a loan, I replied. It's a correction. The first page of the folder was a suggested calendar. 6 months, bi-weekly payments, annotated lines for each installment. I slid it forward. You've said before you want to rebuild trust, I said. This is how we do that. Silence stretched. Dad looked at the page but didn't read it. We don't need to sign anything, he said. We're not criminals. You don't have to be a criminal to be careless, I said softly. This isn't about crime. It's about harm. Mom tapped her nails against the table, an uneven rhythm. This is humiliating, she said. I'm offering a path that doesn't involve courts or credit agencies, I said. But it has to be mutual. She didn't look at me. Neither did he. But I didn't fill the silence. I let the air do what it does best, clarify. Eventually, Dad pushed the folder an inch away. We're not signing anything today. I nodded. That's your choice. I didn't argue. I didn't restate my case. I'd already made it. Instead, I placed a pen on the table, capped, parallel to the binder. You can review it on your own time. But I'll need an answer by next Friday. Mom opened her mouth to say something, closed it. Dad rubbed his jaw, then stared out the window like the trees would solve this for him. I stepped back. I won't be following up. I picked up my keys from the console near the stairs. Before I left, I turned once more and said, if you choose not to respond, that will be your response. The air in the room didn't shift, but I did. I walked to the door, didn't pause this time. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows down the street as I reached my car. I placed the spare folder in the back seat, not thrown, not hidden, just resting, ready. I sat for a minute before turning the key. Silence, then ignition. The heater clicked on, a dull, even sound. I exhaled through my nose. Not relief, just presence. As I pulled away, I saw the blinds move, barely. A shift in the corner of the living room window. Someone watching, maybe. Or just wind. It didn't matter. The offer was on the table, and for the first time, I wasn't sitting beside it hoping. I had stood and left it there. 3 days before the deadline, I sent one last message, short, measured. Following up on the repayment proposal. If I don't receive a signed version or written counter by Friday at 6 p.m., I'll consider the offer declined and all further contributions paused. No apology, no passive voice, just clarity. I included the folder again as an attachment. Nothing new added, nothing taken away. The email bounced back as read within the hour. No reply. The clock began ticking. Not as a threat, just as a reminder. Thursday night, Mom texted, "Can we have more time? This feels rushed." I didn't answer right away. I reread the first message I sent her. The calm guidelines, the clear structure, the ample space I'd given. Then I typed back, "You've had the documents for 11 days. The deadline stands." No dots appeared. No follow-up message came. I set the phone down and returned to the notes I was compiling for my next advisory meeting. This time about layering protections into future accounts, possibly drafting a separate living will. Each task was a fence I hadn't known I'd need. Each clause, a gate I now controlled. The next morning my brother called. He rarely did. His voice was slower than usual, worn at the edges. "Hey." I waited. He cleared his throat. "I heard about the, trust thing. The documents." I said nothing. "I know you're trying to help. I didn't know it would get this serious." "It was always serious," I said. "It just used to be invisible." He let out a breath. "I didn't ask for the money, you know. Mom and Dad just—" I cut him off gently. "I know. This isn't about blame. It's about what happens now." Silence. Then, "If it's really just for the kids, can they still access it? For school, I mean?" I closed my eyes for a beat. "That's the point," I said. "The trust is for them, but it's not a shared pool. It's a boundary." "Okay," he said. "I get it, I think." He didn't offer to help, but for once he didn't ask for anything either. After we hung up, I checked the time. 11:03 a.m., 7 hours left. I walked to the filing cabinet and opened the folder labeled Pending Response, Repayment Proposal. The signature line was still blank. I left it open on the desk, a symbolic spot waiting to be filled or ignored. Then I made lunch, washed the dishes, paid my own bills. The world kept turning, and so did I. At 6:02 p.m., my inbox stayed silent. No email, no signed form, no counteroffer, no request for extension. No effort at all. I took a breath, typed one sentence in the ledger. No response received. Terms expired. Contributions paused effective immediately. Then I clicked save. This wasn't about punishment. It was about the shape of my energy from this point forward. The sun was low. The room was gold and quiet. I walked to the entryway and unplugged the small tray charger where my parents used to plug in their devices when they stayed over. I coiled the cable, stored it in a drawer. Then I wiped the counter clean. No note left behind. No message sent. Just a shift. Small. Complete. They would feel it eventually. Not as noise, but as absence. The following Monday, my brother stopped by without calling. I heard his car pull up, that familiar rattle in the muffler. A minute later, a soft knock on the door, not urgent, almost hesitant. I opened it. He stood there with both hands in his hoodie pockets, looking down. "Hey," he said. "Hi." He didn't step in until I did, like he needed permission even though he'd crossed the driveway. Inside, he sat on the edge of the couch, elbows on knees like a student called into the principal's office. He glanced around. "Smells like rosemary in here," he said. "I burned a candle," I said, "after cleaning." He nodded like it mattered, like that somehow helped him say what he really came to say. "I just wanted to say, thanks," he said, "for setting up the trust." I looked at him. "And?" I asked. He looked down. "I'm not proud," he said. I sat across from him, not to interrogate, just to be level. "You don't have to be proud," I said. "You just have to be clear." He rubbed his palms against his jeans. "I knew they were taking a lot from you. I didn't know how much until I saw that folder." He didn't say how he saw it. Didn't need to. I waited. "I should have said something," he added. "Or stopped it. Or, I don't know. It felt like, not my place." "You were part of it," I said. "Even if you weren't the one pulling the levers." He flinched, then nodded. "You're right." It was the first time I'd heard that from anyone in the family. And it didn't feel like victory. It felt like weather clearing. He stood after a few more minutes, restless. "I'm not here to make things right. I can't. But if the boys ever need help, school stuff, rides, whatever, just ask." "They won't need rides," I said. "They'll have tuition, housing, books, covered." "I know," he said, "because of you." He reached for the door but paused. "Just don't stop showing up for them, even if we don't deserve it." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I walked over, opened the door for him. "Showing up is all I've done," I said. He gave me a small nod and walked out, didn't look back. But I watched him go. After he left, I sat on the floor beside the couch, not overwhelmed, just still. The air in the house felt different, like something had left it. Or maybe something had finally been named. I thought of all the years I'd filled in the gaps. Financial, emotional, logistical. How much of that had become habit, not choice? And how little of it had ever been acknowledged? But this was the first time someone had looked at the truth and not flinched away. And that mattered. Even if nothing else changed. Later that night, I saw Dad in the driveway when I pulled the blinds. He wasn't at the door. He wasn't carrying anything. Just standing there beside the mailbox, hands in his jacket pockets, looking out at the street like it belonged to someone else. I didn't go out. I didn't invite him in. He didn't knock. We both stood still on opposite sides of the glass, the space between us held by more than silence. Then slowly he turned and walked back toward his car. Never looked up, never looked back. I returned to the kitchen and sat by the window. The house was dim. The only light came from the stovetop clock, green and small and exact. I picked up my notebook, turned to a clean page, wrote one sentence. "I don't need apologies. I just need air." Outside, a breeze shifted the edge of the porch flag. The street lamp flickered once, then held steady. Inside, I closed the notebook and left it open on the table. Proof, this time, wasn't a document. It was peace. By the end of the week, no one had signed anything. The repayment form remained untouched. The signature line stayed blank. The deadline had passed and then some. No extensions, no renegotiation, just silence. But there was a shift. Mom texted me 2 days later. "We understand. We'll manage things ourselves moving forward." That was all. No sorry. No explanation. No acknowledgement of the weight behind that decision. But the message was different. This time she didn't ask for help. This time she didn't assume I'd be the fallback. Dad followed suit in his own quiet way. A delivery came to my door. A grocery bag with soup containers, some fruit, a loaf of bread. No note, no call. Just left there on the porch like a peace offering. I stood looking at it for a while, then brought it inside. I didn't eat the soup, but I did place the bread in the freezer. Some gestures don't need reciprocation. They just need to land. At work, I found myself lighter, not happy, not floating, just no longer dragging something invisible. I stopped checking the joint account. I no longer woke up with the impulse to track, confirm, or explain. I still updated the ledger, but only once a week now, not daily. The folder labeled house no longer sat on my desk. I'd moved it to a shelf. Still accessible, still mine, but I didn't need to see it every day to believe it was real. One evening, I sent a message. If at any point you want to contribute to the boys' education directly, I'll share the trust wire info, but I won't mediate. It's either direct or not at all. I included the trust summary terms, just enough for them to understand, not enough to debate. No one replied, but no one pushed back either. That was its own kind of progress. We found a new rhythm. They no longer asked what I earned. I no longer explained how I spent it. There were no dinners, no invitations, but also no demands. We coexisted like neighbors who had once shared a fence, familiar, distant, no longer tangled, and strangely, that absence felt like safety. That night, I turned on the porch light, only for a moment, just to see the shape of things. The house glowed a little in its corners. I stood in the doorway and breathed in. Not victory, not regret. Just a home that no longer borrowed from me without asking. The light flicked off, and I walked back inside. The final confirmation email arrived on a Wednesday morning, while I was folding towels in the small laundry nook by the window.
Subject line: Joint account termination. Final document executed. I tapped the screen once to open it. The message was brief. My closure request had been processed. Remaining funds had been dispersed, according to the routing instructions I submitted 2 weeks earlier. It was done. No alert sent to the family. No notice required. The account we'd shared for almost a decade, quietly, automatically, was now history. I sat on the edge of the couch, the last towel folded across my lap, and stared at the wall for a few minutes. The apartment felt airier somehow, like something had been moved out, even though nothing had. Freedom doesn't always arrive with a shout. Sometimes it enters like a hush. That afternoon, I printed the confirmation letter. The printer let out its low hum. The final page slid into the tray with a light whir thump. The ink smelled faintly metallic. I clipped the letter into a thin folder marked Trust, Finalized. Then I uploaded a copy into the cloud drive labeled Personal, Settled, Financial. Clean break. No more shared access. No more monthly questions. No more conversations about household needs, framed like they were moral obligations. This was the part no one saw. The gentle paperwork of reclaiming your life. I emailed my advisor with the final updates. Subject: Trust status and joint closure confirmed. Body: all documents signed. Distribution system complete. I'll continue managing monthly contributions to the education fund independently. No further family-led transfers. I didn't expect a reply immediately, but she responded 2 hours later. You've done this with clarity. Quiet boundaries are still boundaries. That line stayed with me longer than it should have. I copied it into the notes section of my binder. Sometimes, you just need someone else to say what you already know. I made a list that evening. Canceled account? Fair. Final ledger backed up? Fair. Trust payments automated? Fair. Paper records filed? Fair. At the bottom,
I added one more. Reassurance, not needed. I closed the notebook and didn't place it on the desk. I shelved it. I wasn't in a loop anymore. I wasn't waiting for understanding. The sun poured into the kitchen the next morning. I cracked the window open while brewing coffee. The spring air smelled like faint dust and something green. I didn't check my messages, didn't scan for replies, didn't hover over what if. I poured the coffee into a chipped ceramic mug I'd bought years ago at a roadside antique stand. The handle was slightly uneven. I liked that about it. I sat down at the table with nothing open in front of me. Just light. Just silence. And for once it was enough. The clip on the folder clicked shut with finality. I pressed the metal lever on the hole puncher, let it crunch the pages clean. Then I filed the last copy. Not for protection, not for proof. Just because I'd finished the story on paper. Now the rest of it, whatever piece looked like next, would be written without a ledger, without needing to be recorded to be real. It was Caleb's 7th birthday. The invitation came as a text from Jessica, a group message that included Ryan, her sister, and me. No custom card, no emojis, no sentimental note. Just time, place, and a reminder to bring swim gear for the kids. I almost didn't go. Not out of anger, just a quiet instinct to preserve the stillness I'd finally cultivated. But I remembered what it felt like to show up for people, even when they didn't ask, and how children never understand the layers behind absence. So I went. I chose a modest gift, a building kit with magnetic tiles and an activity book about bridges. I wrapped it in brown paper tied with a single green string. Not flashy, not competitive, just sincere. The party was in Jessica's backyard, foldable chairs in the shade, juice boxes sweating on the table. Laughter spilled from the inflatable pool. Ryan didn't greet me at first. He was at the grill, talking to his brother-in-law. Sunglasses on, baseball cap backwards. A version of himself I didn't know well, and didn't need to anymore. Jessica spotted me and gave a half smile. "You made it." I nodded. "Of course." Caleb came running over, wet hair plastered to his forehead. He hugged my waist before I could kneel. "You came!" "I did. Happy birthday, sweetheart." I handed him the package. He ripped it open right there, eyes wide. "I'm gonna build the tallest tower ever." I smiled. I believe it. I stayed just long enough to sit with Caleb while he started his first build. Long enough to help Lily pour juice without spilling. Long enough for Jessica to notice that I'd brought real napkins, not the flimsy printed kind, and placed them quietly by the cake. But not long enough to join the inside jokes. Not long enough to rejoin the tribe. And that was fine. There's a kind of dignity in exiting without ceremony. No tears, no statements, just the soft closing of a gate latch behind you. On my way out, I passed Ryan by the grill. He looked up, surprised. "You're heading out already?" I shrugged. I was never planning to stay long. He nodded slowly. "Thanks for coming. Caleb was really happy." I smiled. That's all that matters. A pause stretched between us, filled with the sizzle of hot dogs. "Things seem calmer," he finally said. "They are," I answered, and meant it. I didn't need him to say more. I didn't need a reckoning. Some apologies come too late to change the shape of a story, but right on time to close the book. Back home, I poured myself a glass of water and looked out the window. A wind chime in the neighbor's yard clinked softly. A hummingbird hovered near the lavender. The light had shifted slightly in the living room. Late summer sun streaming through. I didn't replay the party in my mind. Didn't imagine what anyone said after I left. I just put the card Caleb made, a red crayon scribble that read, "Thank you," on the fridge. It didn't need to be perfect. Neither did I. Later that night, I wrote a note to myself in my journal. You can love them without leaning in. You can show up without being pulled back. You can give without tethering your worth to the outcome. Then I closed the journal. No need to read it again tomorrow. The lesson had already sunk in. Not just into the page, but into the way I lived. Quietly. Intact. On my own terms. I never shredded the trust documents. They remained in the same folder, sealed with a brass clip, tucked inside the second drawer of my desk, beneath old utility bills, a retirement brochure, and a crumpled list titled Things I Refuse to Forget. People assume closure means erasure. I don't believe in that. The folder isn't about control anymore. It's a memory. Of what I almost did. Of what I didn't. Of what it cost to choose a different kind of power. One Saturday morning, I opened it again, just to look. My signature sat neatly at the bottom of each page. Deliberate, firm, unshaken. It reminded me of the day I had them printed. The quiet resolve in the FedEx lobby. The feel of the pen. The girl behind the counter who complimented my scarf without knowing the storm I was papering over. I closed the folder, not because it hurt, but because it didn't anymore. Lily called me the following week. She wanted help with a school project, something about women inventors. I chose the lady who invented Kevlar, she said. Stephanie Kwolek, I replied. You already knew her? I know a lot of things I never say out loud, she giggled. Can you help me make it pretty? Always. We worked on it for 3 evenings, remotely. I printed her poster at the library, added a small lavender ribbon in the corner, and dropped it at Jessica's doorstep without knocking. No note. She'd know. On the porch, I paused. The screen door still squeaked the same way. The garage light flickered and caught. A small part of me wanted to tighten the screws. Just fix it. Make something easier for them. But I didn't. It wasn't my job anymore to soften their edges. I stepped down quietly and walked back to my car. The world didn't need my fingerprints on every corner. Back home, I made tea. Rooibos this time, no milk. I sat on the porch and watched the neighbor's dog chase a squirrel across the lawn. The mail truck clanked past. A single yellow leaf dropped onto the porch step. Nothing profound, nothing cinematic. Just life, gently continuing. I remembered what it felt like to stand in the middle of the mess, believing it was my duty to clean it all. Then I remembered the version of me who learned to walk around the mess, or leave it where it was. Not every broken thing needs saving, especially not when breaking is what taught you boundaries. The folder remains, not as a threat, not as a weapon, but as a quiet monument to restraint, to power used wisely, to love that learned not to beg for permission. If they ever ask about it, if Ryan or Jessica or even Caleb stumble upon it years from now, I'll tell them the truth, that it was never about punishment. It was about clarity, and clarity, once found, doesn't always need to speak. Sometimes it just sits, quietly, in a drawer, and lets the rest of your life be free. They said I was too generous, until I used the trust fund they forgot I created. That's what started it. Not a scandal, not a screaming match. Just a quiet afternoon at my kitchen table, reading an email from my nephew that began with, "Hey Auntie, could you float us a little more this month?" Float, like I was a bank with no walls. Like my kindness was expected, not earned. For years, I believed love meant giving without limits. I wrote the checks, signed the guarantees, swallowed my pride while they threw family around like currency. But the truth? They never saw me as family, just financing. This story isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming your place when the people closest to you treat your worth like a line item. It's about a woman who set up a trust fund in silence and nearly used it as a weapon, but chose, instead, something sharper: boundaries. If you've ever been guilted for giving too much, if you've ever been told you're cold just for finally saying no, then this story will speak to you. Hit subscribe so you don't miss how it ends, because not every act of power looks like slamming a door. Sometimes, it's just closing a folder and walking away. They never apologized. Not for the names they called me, not for the way they passed around my sacrifices like loose change, not even for laughing when I finally said no. But I didn't need their apology. I had my boundaries. I had my quiet. And most importantly, I had my name back. The folder stayed locked, the money remained untouched, and the peace that followed was worth every dollar I didn't spend on them. Maybe you've lived through something like this. Maybe you're still in it. Tell me in the comments. Have you ever had to draw a line with your own family? I read every single one, and who knows? Your story might just help someone else find their voice too. Don't forget to subscribe for more true stories like this. Stories that aren't always loud, but always real. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away without slamming the door.